Welcome to This Commerce Life. We are an unscripted podcast dedicated to small businesses and entrepreneurs in the retail and consumer packaged goods space in Canada and the United States.
I am Phil Chang, co-host and co-founder.
And I'm Kenny Vanucci, co-host and co-founder of This Commerce Life.
Our love is the journey to retail, and our passion is sharing that with you every week.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you again, Kenny. And
You too.
Phil.
Daniel, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Are you snowed in?
By whose standards? You're talking to a Winnipeg boy.
I was going to say,
Not
okay.
really,
I was
but-
saying, get the Manitoba shit out of your head. We're not talking Manitoba.
Yeah, I know.
We're talking about the delicate people of the West Coast.
You know, there's a few inches of fresh snow on the ground, and that shouldn't stop anybody, but it looks like it has caused many to come to a standstill. So there
We
you
got
go.
about 10 inches in the city, eh? 25
Are you
centimeters.
serious? Yeah, we're far from that. I'd say we have about 2 to 3 inches still sticking around.
Yeah, no, we
Up by
got 10 inches yesterday, and now we're supposed to be getting another dump starting at noon. And we were laughing because you know how they're never right.
No.
So they scare the shit out of us for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
We grind to a stop. Everybody's worried, and then it's a non-event. So we're all kind of betting, okay, whatever. We'll wake up to nothing. We woke up to like about 4 or 5 inches, and it snowed until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We got 10 inches. It's like our deck, literally 10 inches.
Yeah, that's a lot for a city, especially Vancouver.
For this city, Jesus.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah, it is.
I'm a Toronto boy, so I'm undaunted by snow.
He's in
Right?
Mississauga. He doesn't care.
It's got to hit my waist before I start kind of like worrying about how much snow there is. So
Yeah, exactly. No, I hear you.
Yeah, I used to be that when I was, that's many years ago in trail, but when we were little, but that's different.
Yeah.
Now it's snow.
You welcome the snow back then.
Oh my God, it was
God,
the best.
yeah.
We had
Sure.
snow drifts 8 feet high that the snow blowers would pile, and then you'd play fort on the top of them, right? Because they
All
would
day
run
long.
for blocks, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
I know.
You
Yeah.
could be
No,
out there.
all day long. No worry about school. Loved it.
No way,
Lived
man.
in
You
Quebec
snowball
City,
fight
too,
the whole
for
day.
years.
Yeah. The only thing that really stops you, right, is kind of like when you hit that 3 o'clock point and then your mittens get all soggy. It's the only moment you kind of go, oh, now my hands are cold, right? Like, I wonder if I got a spare pair at home that I can go in and change quick and then come back out, right? So
Or you tried to figure a way to warm up while you're there because who wanted to leave?
yeah.
Because you also knew if you went home, then you get shit for being outside and you're too wet and blah, 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 blah.
Okay, now you've got me both jonesing for my youth, where life seemed a lot simpler and my worries a lot more manageable. God.
Yeah, those
You're right,
days
though.
are long
I remember
gone.
those days.
Those days are long gone.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny.
So here we are.
Here we are. Kenny, do you want to do a quick intro?
So this is going to be a little bit of a different podcast, and I told Daniel that I think I was talking via Marisa. So we'll tell you who Daniel Rabu's on the show today. He's a shellfish and marine plant aquaculturist. I'm reading off LinkedIn. You can tell us what that means and who you do things with, but
Sure.
We typically do a lot of CPG on this show, like a lot of consumer packaged goods. We've tried to venture out in the last little bit, talking to, we had Skipper Otto on a little while ago, which was really interesting in talking about fisheries, sustainable fisheries, indigenous fisheries, non-indigenous fisheries. We've had farmers on, people who actually own farms. So we are trying to do a lot more, even just on sort of the food sources in Canada, not just once they get to shelf, but before. So when I've only met Daniel once, just so you know, Phil. So Daniel is a partner to one of our dear friends for a million years, Marisa. And Marisa, her parents were actually Felicia's godparents, not my wife's, my brother-in-law's. So the families go back a million years. And the one time I got to talk to Daniel, we were at our friend Carla and Joe's house, and we were having drinks. And I was just fascinated. First off, he's a very nice guy. Two, just it's such a neat industry and such sort of where we wanted to go, Phil, like what stuff we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it shorter than that. So Daniel's on. This is an easy one. We're completely unscripted. Basically, what we usually do is ask people, give us history. where you came from, why, you know, maybe the career path you sort of got onto, how you ended up here, why you ended up here, and what the hell do you do? Like, what the hell is an aquaculturist, and how's that going to help us, or what should we learn, or how can we get more information to people to be better at whatever we're supposed to be better at? So the next 45 minutes to an hour is yours. We interject periodically if we don't quite understand something, or if we want to prod you a little bit, or ask a question. But otherwise, the show's yours.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation of being on your podcast. I want you both to know this is my first podcast.
Hey.
So there you go.
Awesome.
Welcome.
You know, let me provide a little bit of context. I come from 30 plus years of restaurant sector engagement. I've owned several restaurants. I've owned several cafes. And back in 2008, I sold my last property and decided that I was done. I had done fine dining, I'd done cafes, I'd done resort towns, and didn't seem to be much of a challenge left in that particular industry for me. And I took a few years to travel and to decide what I wanted to do next, and ended up at a conference, a shellfish aquaculture conference in Vancouver, and it really piqued my interest. And you know, from that point on, you know, I found myself going down the path of learning and being mentored about shellfish aquaculture, and then working with First Nations, which is what I specialize in. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do right now. I'm a marine plant, shellfish, and finfish aquaculture advisor to First Nations. I support First Nations in identifying aquaculture opportunities in their traditional territories. I spend time in the field and help them site potential aquaculture farms. And I help them find the necessary financing or funding to help them develop, you know, a shellfish farm or seaweed farm or a finfish farm, and help them navigate the challenging regulatory process of securing an aquaculture tenure and getting all the licenses in place. And then comes the business development. You know, that's just the beginning of how it all starts. You know, I find myself engaged in business development, and currently I'm the fisheries manager for the Kayukut Checklisat First Nations on Vancouver Island. They're located in Kayukut, which is very remote. It's an absolutely stunning place to live, and not easy getting there. You know, it's a 4-hour drive from Campbell River on some very challenging roads once you get off the highway. And then it's a 45-minute boat ride to the actual village, and it's another half-hour boat ride to get to the various farm sites that I've helped them set up. Wow. So, you know, we recently installed an oyster farm for that nation. A lot of what I do is about building capacity and overseeing operations and guiding. And you know, I'm successful when one day I can give them the key and say, hey, you're on your own. You don't need Danielle, you know, the consultant anymore. And, you know, stick to what we've been doing for the last few years and what you now know and the experience you've gained. And there's a really good likelihood that you'll continue producing shellfish or seaweed or sablefish, you know, for as long as you want. And so that's my measure of success. And I've worked with a lot of coastal First Nations. I used to be an advisor, a business and technical advisor for the Aboriginal Aquaculture Association. And so what we did was provided those similar services of guidance and support so that First Nations can participate in the aquaculture sector in a meaningful manner.
Can we pause for a second? I just want to make the distinction, because I think aquaculture, so horticulture is kind of like the science of plants and food, and so aquaculture is that kind of the science of like fish and shellfish, algae, or like the science of water
so
growth?
That's a good approximation. It's the cultivation of marine species, you know, on a very high level kind of definition.
Okay.
So whenever you start planting clam seeds or oyster seeds, and you provide the necessary husbandry over the grow out cycle for that animal to reach market size, you're effectively engaged in the cultivation or the aquaculture of shellfish. And we can grow seaweed, we grow clams, we grow oysters, we grow scallops, we grow geoduck. We're about to start farming sea cucumber, and we hope to very soon start farming abalone. And that's a whole different story. Abalone is on the used to be a very abundant species in British Columbian waters prior to its near extirpation because of a very poorly managed commercial fishery over several decades. And so currently the abalone is on the Species at Risk Act list, the SAREC list. And so the government doesn't allow anybody to even touch abalone, let alone go out there and start farming them. But we're about to change that. And that's one of the benefits of working with First Nations. I believe First Nations hold the key to the future of sustainable aquaculture development in British Columbia. There are several Supreme Court decisions that have made it so that our government has to consult and accommodate First Nations when making decisions that affect use or access of land in their traditional territories. And so if you want, to start farming oysters, you need to secure a license of occupation. It's like a lease, also known as a tenure. And you need to have a discussion with that nation whose territory your farm is going to be located, to make sure that your activities are aligned with their principles and their laws and values and Aboriginal rights. So yeah, back to the definition, it's the farming or cultivation of marine species. And, I named a few of the shellfish that we do. We're also looking at farming sablefish in partnership with an industry leader in the sablefish aquaculture sector. And that's really exciting because sablefish farming doesn't carry with it any of the public misinformation or the lack of social license or the pushback from the anti-salmon farming.
I was going to ask you about that.
Sablefish aquaculture, it differs from farming Atlantic salmon in that we're farming an indigenous species.
Right.
Sablefish, are in BC waters, wild sablefish. It's also a species that has no disease to be worried about in terms of potentially transferring to wild stocks. And sablefish don't really have or create a sea lice issue. And so there's no real reason to oppose sablefish aquaculture. So that's really interesting. And,
wow.
At the end of the day, it's about supporting and facilitating First Nation engagement in probably the most sustainable approach to producing protein that man knows and currently has access to. So it's a good game. And I don't know anybody who doesn't like seafood. I think we've farmed the land as much as we can. We're losing, farmland to climate change, to drought, to various environmental impacts. But we have a lot of ocean yet to be farmed. And Jacques Cousteau, famed French oceanographer, said in 1973 that man must stop acting like barbarians and hunting the sea, and must, in order to access seafood in a more sustainable manner, start farming the ocean. And that's kind of my mantra. We need to farm our oceans sustainably, and there's many ways of being able to do that. British Columbia is blessed with miles and miles, or kilometers and kilometers of pristine coastal waters. We have everything that it takes to be very successful, and yet because of a lot of challenges, a lot of reasons, we are a country with a very small aquaculture industry kind of footprint. And whereas aquaculture is growing 10, 12% yearly around the world, Canada's aquaculture sector, not only has it been stagnant for the last 10 years, it's actually getting smaller. And a lot of that has to do with the regulatory burdens, the challenges of being able to secure, new aquaculture sites, and of course a few other things such as access to seed or smolts. So we're not there, but the future could look bright for British Columbia in terms of aquaculture.
I guess I would. It's funny because we have a lot of coastline as a country. We have a lot of coastline between the two coasts and then the north, because I'm assuming you can do things everywhere.
Yeah,
I guess. It's probably because we had Skipper on, and I watched the documentary that CBC did sort of on them. So like even on the oyster farming and how cool that was, because it was really even about the filtration that the animal does in the water and how it cleans the water, etc.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying. I just wonder. I don't know what I'm wondering. I wonder sometimes.
What are you wondering, Kenny?
Well, because you know what it is. Because it's like I sort of get the shellfish, but as soon as we got into finfish, it's the connotation of farming finfish, because salmon comes to mind, and it's all the shit that goes with that.
Yeah,
it's the sea lice, and everybody, not everybody, but so many people against it, and then it's trying to, make sure that the right messaging gets. So there's a reason to do this.
Yeah. So and I get that. And, this is what we face. Even as a primarily shellfish and marine plant aquaculture advisor, I often get people, the moment I talk about aquaculture, I say the word aquaculture, you can tell where their minds go. And immediately it's like, boom, you're the devil reincarnate, and you're killing our oceans. And, there is nothing more sustainable. And I'll get back to the sustainability of aquaculture. But speaking about finfish aquaculture, I think it's important to remind ourselves that 70% of all salmon consumed globally is farmed. This is a reality. So, the world consumes a fairly large amount of salmon. And so you have to ask yourself, what would happen if all of a sudden that 70% farmed salmon was taken out of the equation? 100% of the demand would rely on 30% of the supply.
Yeah, which
means the demand is growing.
Yeah.
Right. And the demand is growing and the supply is dwindling. And so at the end of the day, we must farm salmon, just like we've had to farm cattle. I don't know of anybody going to their superstore and buying fresh bison meat on a regular basis. And, we farm chicken. We're not relying on wild grouse or wild turkey to meet, those needs, those food needs. At the end of the day, man has to farm. There's just too many people on this planet to rely on wild resources and hunting, and nor would that be. I can only imagine everybody in Vancouver having to hunt for their meat or hunt for their fish or go fishing.
We can't even drive in the snow.
Unless it snows, Daniel. And then
we can't even drive in the snow. You want to give people guns?
Right. So this whole argument, about the I understand there's some concerns about farming Atlantic salmons in BC waters, but that was a decision done by DFO years ago, because they actually tried stocking rivers in the early 1900s with Atlantic salmon smolts just to see if they would take, see if they'd reproduce and potentially overtake our wild BC salmon populations. And guess what? They didn't. And so DFO came to the decision that, if we're going to allow salmon farming in British Columbia, how about we focus on Atlantic salmon? Because if there's escapes, we know they won't live in the wild. They won't reproduce with wild Pacific salmon stocks. And that's true. Science is there to prove that. And so that's why. But I get the lack of comfort that knowing that, a different species of salmon is being farmed in our BC waters. So, and I'm not going to defend or support that. It is what it is. But, that's one of my reasons for focusing on sablefish being an indigenous.
You're talking indigenous fish, though, right? That's the difference.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole discussion about, let's not farm salmon in the ocean, to me, that's absolutely crazy. I will agree that salmon farms in the past, when we didn't know what we know today, were located in areas that perhaps they shouldn't have been. So we know more about the bathymetry, the importance of currents, the impact of fecal waste depositing on the ocean floor. Salmon, they're fed, so they've got to poop. And, if you don't have a farm that's properly sited, yeah, you're going to run into problems. There's no doubt about that. You're going to end up with these, I guess, dead zones, if you want, where you've just got this huge accumulation of organic biological waste that ends up creating anoxic conditions, and nothing really thrives in that kind of a environment underneath a salmon farm. But the majority of salmon farms today, and the ones that are still operating and doing very well, are farms that are located in areas that can support salmon farming. And so, do you argue against clearing 100 acres of land in Saskatchewan so you can grow cattle because you're going to wipe out a couple species of native plants? Or do you understand that we need to farm cattle? We need to farm salmon. And if we were to transfer salmon farming on land, which, by the way, nowhere in the world is this being done successfully on a commercial basis. You can look at very large operations like Sapphire in the United States that have pumped hundreds of millions of dollars and are still not, profitable. So at the end of the day, we're not there yet. It may very well be that one day we do end up farming salmon on land, but today it takes less energy. In other words, there's no need for electricity to flow water in these very complicated recirculating systems that keep salmon in the same water and skim off, all the nitrites and ammonia and all the bad stuff. You are farming salmon in an environment that is far less costly to do, has a much smaller environmental footprint in terms of energy requirements, in terms of land footprint and everything else that's associated with that. And the big players are coming up and have implemented technology that, I'm from Winnipeg. I understand farming, and I do not know of any other sector in Canada that produces food that has invested as much money in research and innovative development as the salmon farming industry. And again, I want to say, I'm not here to defend the salmon farming industry, but I do want to maybe clarify some of the misinformation that a handful of people, with some of them interesting agendas, if you do a little digging, spend a lot of time and money promoting all this misinformation about salmon farming. And when you dig down a little bit into their background and where the money's coming from and why they want to do this, it makes you realize that this isn't science-based propaganda. This isn't, they take a little out of context fact and they turn it in such a way that they're able to convince the public, which is largely ignorant. Let's be honest. People in Canada, people in BC don't really care where your food comes from.
Yeah. No.
They don't really invest themselves in getting to know their food producers.
Right.
And so maybe that's the shift that needs to change. And I love Skipper Otto. This is such an innovative breath of fresh air for getting seafood to the table, to the consumer. And it's cutting out a lot of middlemen, and it's creating more direct channels. It's helping with freshness. It's helping with supporting the smaller producers. I love that concept. But we have to keep in mind that it all starts with the farm or the fisherman.
And I think that's even what they're trying to push to, Daniel. Yeah. Not to give them a plug, but I'm with you. Because I told Amelia, because I subscribed, and it's not inexpensive. Let's be clear.
No, but food isn't inexpensive. Good food isn't inexpensive to produce.
Like the quality of fish, the quality of fish is not even close to what you get at a supermarket. Period. And I'm not bullshitting, but I'm telling you, man, it is different. And I guess
and more money ends up in the fisherman's pocket. I like that.
That comes back to it. I think a large part of the potential backlash. This is my opinion now too, because I want to understand. It's going to lead to the question of why you work where you work. I think the larger problem we have in food production in general, whether it's farming, cattle, fish, or whatever, it's really the institutional industrial complex.
Yeah.
It rapes the land, it rapes the oceans. It's just a shit show. I don't care. I don't know how else you explain it.
It displaces the small farmer.
It just kills. It just doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
Where it feels to me, the stuff you're talking about, the Skipper Otto's talking about, we've had Hopcott Farms on, we've had other farmers on. It's trying to go back as best you can, sort of to the old days where you you use, abuse the land, the water, or whatever. So if I might ask then, so why or how did you end up with predominantly First Nations, Indigenous peoples in these areas? Is there a reason for that? Is it more of a historical play? Is it because they do fishing better? Is it? I'm trying to get some context, like, of why we can't do more on the West Coast in general.
I often ask myself somewhat the same question. I'll tell you what. First of all, I should disclose I'm Indigenous. I am a Red River Métis person on my mother's side, and I have some Cree and Blackfoot in my ancestral lineage. So, and not, I don't believe that has anything to do with my decision to work with First Nations, but who knows? Because I often wonder. So, how did I end up working for First Nations? I actually attended a conference on geoduck aquaculture. Now, geoduck is a high-value species, highly sought after by primarily Asian markets. And 99.9% of the geoduck harvested in Canada, and the geoduck can only be fished from southern Alaska to, let's say, Washington State, the geoduck that's in demand. Although it should be said that Mexico also has an ability or has a geoduck fishery. And so, but anyways, let's get back to the geoduck. So I was invited to a conference put on by what many will consider the foremost authority on subtidal geoduck aquaculture in the Pacific Northwest, Eric Gantz. And he's actually one of the guys that started the geoduck fishery when geoduck was worth like 15 cents a pound. Actually, at one point, back in the, I would say in the late 80s or so, if I'm correct, geoduck was less expensive than Manila clams. And I was told that BC Ferries, who at that time had a wonderful reputation for its clam chowder, the reason for that is because they were using geoduck before geoduck became expensive and fashionable in their chowder, which would explain why it was so good. So back to this, why am I working with First Nations? I went to this conference and I was fascinated by the possibilities of this type of aquaculture. And nobody else was doing it, by the way.
Right.
And DFO wasn't even allowing it at that time. But the potential was there. And I was talking about this to a friend of mine who used to be the chief, the CEO of the Haida Nations Economic Development Corporation. And he said, wow, let's have that discussion. Do you think there's any potential for geoduck aquaculture up in Haida Gwaii? And I went back to this fellow that was presenting the geoduck aquaculture conference, and he said, wow, that's where some of the best wild geoduck are found, actually. And told me a little bit about its history. And I said, I think there might be an opportunity. Would you be interested in forming some kind of a partnership if I were able to get the Haida on board with us to jointly develop geoduck aquaculture in Haida Gwaii? And, if anybody had the political capital to tell the Canadian government, look, this is what we want to do, I, in my mind, thought, it would be the Haida, the Haida Nation. And so I ended up going up there and started working closely with them and spent 6 years of my life. And during that time, formed a business partnership with the Haida, where they were majority owners. And we were going to propose that using our technology, using my partner's experience and knowledge, and my determination, that we would set up these geoduck farms up in Haida Gwaii. And that was all coming along somewhat well until the Canadian government denied us our ability to secure, the necessary tenures up there, because the Haida Nation is currently, seeking title for their lands and territory from the Canadian government. And so it basically came down to, we ended up being,
caught in a territory dispute.
Caught in a much bigger situation.
A war to fight.
So, I came down from Haida Gwaii, and I guess some folks heard about my work in pushing DFO and the Ministry of Forest Lands Natural Resource Operations for these geoduck tenures and geoduck licenses and the work that we did up there. And I was asked to join an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Aboriginal Aquaculture Association. And so that is where I started consulting First Nations on shellfish aquaculture development. And I realized that politically and in terms of access to land, or in this case, water farm sites, First Nations hold the key. And there's tremendous potential. And I was really turned on, for lack of a better word, by the values and the principles of environmental stewardship. And it all fit with what I wanted to do with my life and leave as a legacy. The restaurant industry is a lot of fun, and it's very satisfying, ego and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it involves a lot of resources. Growing seafood just seemed like what I wanted to do. And working with First Nations, who have tremendous opportunity in these remote areas, pristine waters, away from city centers, was really exciting. And they were really open to the idea of shellfish aquaculture. Shellfish aquaculture, not only are you not having to feed these animals, there's no antibiotics used, there's no pesticides used in shellfish aquaculture. You're basically taking seed produced in a hatchery and you're outplanting it in these ocean-based farms, and Mother Nature does all the feeding. And so that's a good story. But even cooler is the fact that shellfish, as they grow their shell, they're literally sequestering carbon. And that carbon comes from the water column. But originally, our oceans are the biggest anthropogenic uptakers of carbon from the atmosphere. Right. So, every, pound of oysters is about 15 to 18% made up of carbon and the calcium carbonate that makes up for, the shellfish. And so when you're growing shellfish, you're literally taking carbon out of the atmosphere, you're sequestering it, and you're doing it better than trees can. You're doing it faster than trees can, and you're doing it forever. Because when an oyster dies, that oyster shell just falls to the ocean floor, and after millions of years, it becomes a limestone. So the carbon it's gone back into,
right,
where it came from. And so, that's a positive note in terms of climate change and carbon sequestration. So another reason for wanting to do this, and that's the same with seaweed. Although seaweed, the carbon cycle sequestration is shorter. In other words, when that seaweed dies, if it's left in the water, that carbon just returns to the environment. Same as trees,
Right.
Yeah. And so, the idea is to grow seaweed to eat it, or to produce nutraceuticals or pharmaceuticals, or to even sell to the livestock feed industry, because it's been shown that adding certain types of seaweed to livestock feed actually reduces the methane output of livestock, which is one of the biggest contributing factors to, greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
So, methane is 20 times as bad as carbon, and cows belch and fart more methane than anything else.
Well, I think it's the largest single contributor to the problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so adding seaweed to their diet is one way of mitigating the impacts of carbon on our
I think talking to you is a highlight that I literally know nothing about. I am learning like a million things all of
well,
this.
This is why I told you.
Fire hose.
I think I told you.
Let me blow your mind even further. I don't know if you know this, but you can actually make diesel biofuel out of seaweed. So you're not sequestering carbon necessarily, but you're not creating more carbon by releasing it from hydrocarbons, i.e. fuel oil.
Yeah.
You can actually grow seaweed, and there are countries and companies around the world that are making biofuel out of it. You can run a car on seaweed diesel, if you wanted to. Most people don't think of seaweed as Nike is making experimental Nike shoes with seaweed extract, which is fully biodegradable, and there's a lot of potential.
People in general just don't think. Period. Like we really don't know what we can and can't do, and I guess that's sort of where like even with what you're doing, I mean we have so much coastline. Like how big can this get? Like how much difference can you actually make? How much without making it an institute or industrial like you don't want to get to the point where you become one of what we're all trying to avoid.
Yeah.
You don't want to become an industrial institutional aqua farmer where it's going to be back to a shit show, because that happens. But how big can this get? Like, can you actually get to a scale where it makes it like I wish like I love the Skipper Otto story. I really enjoy talking to you at Carla and Joe's. That's why you're here, because I'm fascinated by all this. And, and I think we're all trying to make a difference and do something that matters. But we typically, I think, generally speaking, I think we all feel defeated in a lot of ways. We know most of our recycling doesn't go to recycling. We know that, we should drive less cars, but then we worry about this and we worry about you get to the point where you just don't know what the hell you're doing. So you don't do much of anything.
But we also, the only thing that we're sure of is that we know nothing about, like Kenny, the Skipper Otto thing to me, I haven't bought from them, but I subscribe and I watch everything because just the trends alone of what's available and what's not available is knowledge that I never had before.
I never knew it either because it's available.
No idea, what stock is low and what's not available and what's, all of those things are new to me completely. Right. And so I feel like all of these things are, it's really, just great, a base layer that we need so that we, because Canadians know about this much about farming, right?
Yeah.
And then we know even less, because unless I'm in a recreational boat of some sort, a canoe, a kayak, a motorboat, a sailboat, or a cruise ship, what do I know about the water, right? Like not a whole lot, right? Like,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And this is why discussions like this are so important, right? It's all about education. But at the end of the day, I mean, you got to scratch your head and ask yourself, does it really make sense that we're eating oranges from Florida in January, or being able to buy, asparagus from Peru, or, I mean,
okay, but the only thing is, you're from Winnipeg, and I'm from Ontario.
Right. But how much of our
in January, what fruits would you be eating?
But I think this is what it comes down to.
But eating locally produced seafood, that's part of the solution.
Yeah.
You're eliminating these huge distribution, impacts and trucking, and so. But so to your question, Kenny, BC has the potential of becoming, the leading producer of sustainably farmed seafood. There's no doubt in my mind. The waters around Japan, there's not a lot more you can extract from them.
No.
The coastline of Korea and the Chinese Sea, and I mean, there's a lot of pollution that these countries have to contend with, and we're fortunate, and we know enough to do it right, and so that's why I'm really passionate about this. And to answer your questions, I mean, First Nations could be leaders in going at this alone, or even being partners with industry leaders in shellfish aquaculture, marine plant aquaculture. The opportunities are endless. And so, there are some challenges. Many of these areas are remote, which is also a benefit because there's no human pollution to contend with.
Which is what you'd like.
But getting product to market isn't as cheap as putting it on a container ship, or
100%. Yeah.
So that's what we need to accept, and also come up with innovative solutions. The mindset of Canadians and how much they're willing to pay for food, and the quality of the food that they're willing to put in their body without questioning, that needs to change.
Well, we're not close to that, buddy.
No, we're not. But I feel that there's a movement afoot that people are we wouldn't have grocers that are now offering organic selection that is bigger than just like maybe 2% of their shelf space. I mean, there's a considerable movement. And if you think back, 30 years ago, there wasn't a lot of interest in organic anything, and now, I mean, it's not a fad anymore, is it?
No, we're actually looking
for sustainability is not a fad.
Right.
It's a reality. And so we need to take that, the same thinking that makes a person spend more money for a Tesla or any other new, more sustainable technology. We need to kind of have people thinking that way about food. And
you are seeing some of those movements, right? You're seeing some of those movements. Sorry, Daniel. Like even on the meat side of things, like you've got companies like True Local and folks like that are starting to get you as close to like farm to your house as they can. It's actually really pushing the boundaries, right? Because people are realizing there's a better way to eat. it's funny because the folks like True Local, when we met we order from True Local, and the True Local guy said to us, listen, I don't have a sales pitch. What I'm going to give you is this frozen piece of chicken. And you should cook this, and then you should cook what you get from your grocery store. And then when mine stays the same size and the one from the grocery store shrinks to half its size, you call me back when you're ready, and
we'll figure it out.
It's the only pitch, right? And you realize, like, holy shit, right? Like, what am I eating, right? Like, this is so good, right? Like, and it's
it's all of it, right? It's all the same. It's a Skipper Auto thing, buddy. I mean, I loaded the card. Now I'm thinking, it's funny. I tell you what the Phil thing was accurate, Daniel, and I'm sure this in the fisheries. I'm going onto the site, and I've got 2 weeks to order, let's say, some type of fish. And I'm thinking, well, fuck, why am I rushing? It's going to be in the store. It's in the store every day. And then you're thinking, well, why are they telling me I only got a time limit, but these guys could have it all year? Like, what is this shit that I'm buying over here? Because these are the people taking it out of the water, and they're telling me the window's this big.
That's right. There's a reason for it.
Well, but yeah.
So that's the questions we must ask ourselves and start thinking about, right?
Yeah.
But the thing about aquaculture is we let Mother Nature feed. I mean, shellfish aquaculture, marine plant aquaculture, seaweed aquaculture. Let's call it that instead of marine plant. The feeding is done. Mother Nature takes care of that. And if you've got a well-sited farm, you've got great product. And at the end of the day, it's not. You can have it fresh, and it's high quality, and it's good food, and you're supporting good people, farmers that are going out in the toughest of weather, challenging conditions, but determined, to be successful at this. And it's another thing I like working about First Nations is money is not like, the first motivating, piece of the equation.
Right.
The social return on investing in aquaculture is really important for First Nation. Creates jobs. Those are really important to remote locations. It's work that's aligned with, historically what First Nations did to access food. Get in a boat and go out in the water and harvest, clams from this beach, oysters from that beach, crab from this little spot, and halibut and salmon, and that kind of work is, and aquaculture is very much aligned in terms as an activity with historically what they were doing. And again, it's sustainable.
I think that's
so all those pieces make it really attractive for First Nations.
I think that's why we all rely. I think maybe that's the movement become where it has legs, is that I think we're all relying on any Indigenous communities all over the world to say, listen, you guys were doing it for 1,000 years, 10,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you figured something out. Yeah. And we've managed to fuck it up pretty good in 50 years. Maybe we should just go back and read the book again.
Yeah.
Because
I do a lot of traditional knowledge. Like I listen to traditional knowledge, and I pass as much of it on as I can to DFO in some of the projects that I apply for. And, I keep reminding them, look at the stewardship of this environment, was being done in this manner for the last 5,000, 10,000 years, and it worked. And let's be honest, you guys come in and make decisions from your ivory towers in Ottawa and don't have a real clue of what's going on or how it should be done.
No.
And, at the end of the day, there's a lot to be learned. And, you can have scientists tell you why you shouldn't be eating, shellfish from a particular area because of, biotoxin testing and, E. coli and fecal coliform testing and blah, blah, blah. Or you can go to an elder in the village and saying, no, we're not going to be eating oysters from that, that area. There's a creek that flows into it. You've got salmon running up the creek during these months, and you've got the bears eating the salmon. And what do you think the bears do by the riverside? Well, they poop. And so I'm going, wow, so easy.
Yeah, not rocket science, right?
So easy to understand, and yet it takes, the Canadian Shellfish Sanitation Program and the CFIA and DFO scientists to come and measure and take some shellfish samples, going, hey, there's some fecal coliform in these shellfish. They're filter feeders. Like, well, you can't harvest them. I'm going, no kidding, you can't harvest them. We'll wait till it clears up and there's no more bears pooping by the riverside because the salmon are gone now.
Yeah, all you need to ask with one elder to think, and listen, let me tell you a story. This is not rocket science. Just listen to this quick story. You get it now?
There's that
tell the
connection
elder
to
how
the
much.
land. There's that connection to the land and water, which I don't feel that we have
No.
today in society. But by God, it's strong and it's real in the communities that I work, the First Nation communities that I work.
We
So
can
it's coming
tell the
back.
elder how much
Gained,
we're paying those departments to do the test.
right? There's a lot to be gained. And I'm not anti-science. Trust me, I value
Yeah.
science. I base all my decision making on science. But I take traditional knowledge very, very seriously, and it's an important aspect of decision making for us in the work that we do. You know,
But
and I work for quite a few First Nations.
But I think it should be in general. And again, that works with all peoples, is that we all go back. I mean, there's ancient or old Asian medicines, plant medicines. There's like all these old cultures. I mean, we made it long and hard before, pharmaceuticals and before,
Technology.
I mean, again, the reason we're living longer, let's be very clear. The reason we're living so much longer now is probably in large part the fact that we can move food very quickly. We've got, we have pharmaceuticals. I'm not knocking that side. Don't get me wrong.
I appreciate
Otherwise,
that.
50 would be the life expectancy. I know we're pushing 85. I know the reasons why.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a better way to do this. And I'm hoping with people like you and people we've had on is trying to get back that, just saying, listen, 3 seconds worth of questioning. Like, should we wonder why we're buying halibut, let's say in May, and we know it doesn't happen in May, or why we're buying salmon still in May, and we know the runs were kind of like last August, September.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta ask yourself, like, why is this looking here? Why is it here? Why is it fresh?
I think we need to shift our focus from convenience and low cost to quality.
I wish we would.
And I'm doing it. I think you guys are probably doing that.
We're trying to.
Yeah.
So, and we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So
I'm just saying, I think on the seafood front, I think that the knowledge is even, the pandemic was a really good example of good and pandemic don't normally go in the same sentence, right? But one of the things that I think, everyone who started kind of farming in their backyards, all of a sudden realized, like, I can't plant a couple of potato plants, a couple of tomato plants, and feed a family of 4. It's not possible.
Well, you can't for a meal.
Like, barely a meal, right? Like, my 2 potato plants feeds my family of 5 for a meal and a half, maybe, right? Like, and so you kind of go, oh, hang on a second, we need a whole lot more stuff. And I think, one, that was something that made everyone go, oh, wait, and then the other part was, well, shit. So what did people eat in the winter when you can't grow oranges in Ontario, right? But I think with seafood, we're not there. We're like babies still, right? Because I don't even think that we understand, like, so even the seasonality conversation isn't really a thing. So even though we want to up level quality, I think, and listeners, if you think I'm wrong, you should send us a note. But I don't think we even know. Like, we barely know what's supposed to be in season when. Like, I'm Asian, so abalone, like, we used to eat it all the time, right? Like, do I know if there's a season? No, I just know that, come Chinese New Year, like, when we're out, we order it, it's available, right? Like, I don't know anything about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like those are the first parts of these conversations. It's like, hang on a second, you shouldn't, in the same way that I now know, in the fall, you get apples, you don't get them again until next fall, right? So if you buy them in January through July, they come from somewhere else in the world, right? Like, that's a key fundamental fact, right? But I don't know if, I kind of know when the salmon runs are because I see them on National Geographic, right? But I don't actually know, right? So, and I don't actually know when it runs out. So if I buy them in May, is that our salmon or somebody else's salmon? Or like all of those things have yet to happen.
We've lost touch with sort
of.
We never had it.
So I can tell you I never had it, right? So I don't know. It's
an education thing, right?
Yeah.
And that I go into Hoopsy Toss, which is the village of Cayuga Chickasaw First Nations, And, you ask, a teenager, like, what time of the year are crab abundant? They'll tell you. What time of the year are clams best at? They'll tell you, like they know.
Right.
And that's because auntie and uncle have told them, and they've learned from mom and dad and their grandparents. And that knowledge has been carried through, because I'll tell you something, up in Hootsitas, in Cayuca, there's no chain restaurant. There's no restaurant except for a couple small fishing lodges that have, some dining rooms. There's no Starbucks. There's no coffee place.
Right.
There's no grocery store.
I'll say there's probably no grocery.
There's no grocery store.
So you
run out of butter, you are out of butter. You run out of milk, you are out of milk. Until you can jump into a boat, drive 45 minutes to Fair Harbor, and hope that their little marina store that just has a few things, and fairly expensive, because they've had to transport it all from Campbell River. Like, these folks have to go to Campbell River to buy their coffee, their orange juice concentrate, and the butter that they're going to use. So when you don't have access to food, when it's not convenient, when it's not easily accessible, you pay attention to what you've got in the front yard. When the tide goes out, you know what you can get. So, I've actually been up in Hootsitas for several days doing my work. And I planned for my meals in my little motel suite, and I've run out of something. It's like, oh God! And very quickly I realized, God, I can go to the beach and pick up some clams, or I can go in knee deep water and get myself a crab, cook that up for dinner. And you know what? I don't care if I have butter or not to go with it, because it's so exquisitely fresh and beautiful. And so you adjust, you learn to adjust. And this is something that's kind of new for us, I guess, or non-Indigenous people that aren't living in First Nation lands, but they adapt. It's not a big deal, right? Yeah. Oh, this is what we need to know. Like, when is food available? Is it normal to have artichokes from Costa Rica on our supermarket shelves, or like stuff like that, like raspberries from Peru, like And is it right that we're eating these foods, creating the demand, encouraging the distributors to ship those products all the way from at a great environmental cost?
Some of these foods travel more than most people on this planet will ever.
Yeah. Now, having said that, do not expect me to not want my coffee, from Ethiopia or Sumatra, because I still want my coffee from there. But there's a lot of.
I want my coffee, period, and I know it doesn't come from here. We're not studying. Right?
So, it's also recognizing that some things we don't do very well.
But I think that's okay. I think that's the part that's okay. But I think it's like every old culture adapted. Like, you just didn't have apples, to your point. You know why you had apples in Jan Feb? Because you put them in cold storage. And that's it. You could have potatoes. Like, even in Trail, we used to go to Grand Forks every fall. And because my dad had a big pickup, and we got 4 or 5 families, and some would buy 600 pounds of potatoes to last the winter. They didn't have to go to the store because they wanted farm fresh. But it was all in cold storage in the cantinas where the wine was held, and all the other things, right? It's just old school. Old school.
You're right. And since joining, this Italian family, my fiance's family, I've gotten back to understanding how that works. I mean, when the tomatoes are ripe and ready to be processed, man, it's a family affair. And out of that 1 or 2 day or 3 day effort comes like 800 jars of tomato sauce. Mind-blowing good, and it's there. And then you've got Nono making prosciutto and salami for the rest of the year for the whole family. Yeah. So up in Cayuca, when the halibut season, I mean, there's a food fishery, and they all go out and gather the halibut they need for the year, and they'll either dry it, or
smoke it, salt
they'll char it, which is kind of like canning, or they'll smoke it for salmon and sablefish. I don't know if you've had smoked sablefish. There's no better smoked fish anywhere, and I've had pretty much everything that can be smoked. Sablefish is amazing.
I've never had smoked sablefish. I love sablefish.
Oh, it's butterfish, right? Oh, and you know what? When I was in the restaurant business, we called it, black cod.
Yeah.
You could not give that away on a menu. I could not give it away.
Really?
Now with sablefish, nobody wanted to order black cod.
Really?
I mean,
Black cod is like
cod is
heaven.
cod. In most people's mind, cod is fish and chips fish. Right?
Yeah.
But the
Really?
day the marketing gurus of the black cod fishing industry decided to start calling it sablefish, I could charge almost as much as a New York strip loin on a
Yeah.
plate with a piece of sablefish. I could charge as much as Chilean sea bass
Yeah.
for BC sablefish because of the name change. And that's something else, to consider. But I wanted to share with you guys a little something. I do aquaculture, and I do it obviously for profit on behalf of those nations and creating jobs. And but there's a project that we're working on, and I touched a little bit on it, and that's the abalone. So currently nowhere in Canada are you allowed to farm abalone. For that matter, you're not really allowed to say the word abalone in the DFO office. I think they might throw you in jail because it's a species that was nearly extirpated because of bad DFO management and a very greedy commercial fishery and a lot of poaching, because it's very good and it's very expensive. So
my people
having said that, yeah, and other countries around the world farm abalone very successfully. They've had there's still countries in the world that have a limited commercial abalone fishery. But in my opinion, aquaculture is really the only way to produce abalone sustainably. Having said that, even though we know how to do it, even though there are no disease or genetic risks, even though people have done it before us, our government is still of the mindset that because it's on the SARA list, we just can't entertain the idea. And so this is where I'm working with the nation that I'm working with, which is a treaty nation, and we're kind of leveraging the political capital that brings to the negotiating table when having these meetings with DFO and the federal government. Like, we're going to farm abalone, and we're not necessarily asking for permission. We know we can do this. We know this is environmentally sound, and we want to help wild populations come back, and we want to
maybe it'll take them off the list.
Well, eventually, absolutely, right.
Well, isn't that the whole point? So why worry about the list? Why did you get them off the list?
And as long as you can't access abalone legally, there are going to be poachers that go and raid abalone
because the price is through the roof.
And they go to a back porch of some restaurant. That restaurant prepares abalones and sells it to their privileged customers without anybody really knowing, but really knowing, at exorbitant prices, and people will pay it. And so, you're continuously putting these stresses on the wild abalone population. So, let's shift to farming them, and then there'll be no incentive to poach them. So anyways, I don't want to be too off track here, but one of the reasons I'm doing this, and why, the hereditary chiefs and the leadership of this nation are really supportive of this project, is because nobody in that particular village has tasted abalone for the last 30 years. There are elders there that when you talk about abalone, their eyes swell up because they remember eating abalone as a little girl before the closure of the commercial abalone fishery, before when they were allowed to go and collect abalone for their own personal use. And so, I put my thinking cap on. I said, okay, let's maybe not start farming abalone for commercial purposes. How about farming abalone for food and social and ceremonial purposes? Bringing abalone back in their diet because it's so important. I did a little bit of, research, and historically, abalone was a really culturally important, seafood in all of British Columbia's West Coast First Nations. And so what we're trying to do, and what we will accomplish eventually, is bring this really important part of their culture back into their, I'm not going to say daily diet, but certainly into their diet, so that the young people can experience a food that was really important to this nation. And they never had any problems in accessing the abalone, nor were they overfishing it, back then. It was a commercial fishery that really wiped it out. And so that's really huge. That's a big reason for engaging in that particular type of aquaculture. So aquaculture isn't always necessarily about just growing shellfish or marine plants or finfish for food. It can be for helping restocking wild populations that have been decimated. Right. It can be for social and ceremonial purposes. It can also be for trade and barter with other nations that don't have access to abalone.
Right.
So I look forward to the day that we can participate in a feast, like a potlatch of sorts, and this nation can provide abalone, while another nation, maybe from the Central Coast or North Coast, can provide some ulucan grease, which is another culturally significant food, right? and start that kind of trade again, which First Nations used to do before contact. I mean, that would be really cool.
Right.
That would be
So,
really cool.
yeah, just a few of the reasons
So
why.
can I ask one thing, because we're running late. We're gonna run late,
Yeah.
which is fine.
Sure.
But, when we talk aquaculture, are we strictly talking like coastline, rivers, lakes? Like, is there anything there, or is that just silly talk?
There is a fellow that is raising sockeye, not an easy fish to farm, and nobody's farming it in the ocean, by the way, but he is raising sockeye in these ponds that he dug out on his agriculture land in Langley. And these ponds are fed with artisanal fresh water, which is what sockeye want for the first year or two of their life. And he's raising sockeye to 7-8 pounds a piece and selling it to a local small distributor in British Columbia. So there are companies that are raising trout in land-based facilities using fresh water.
Yeah.
There are, obviously land-based shrimp farms and land-based other marine species farms. So it's not limited to the ocean, but I find that the ocean is where it costs less energy. The infrastructure is easier to install, easier to manage, much higher, success rate, survival rate. I mean, when you're growing tilapia in a recirculating finfish facility in the interior, you have to feed it electricity to keep the pumps going and all the systems going. You need to heat that facility potentially during the winter, depending on where it is. You need to refrigerate that facility in the summer, depending on where it is. And you need to pay scientists, basically engineers almost, I would say, enough to keep that whole recirculating system where they're skimming the water of excess protein, taking out nitrites and waste, and making the water suitable for using it over and over and over again. I mean, that's why the failure rate is quite high when trying to do this with salmon. And a First Nation that got involved with Kutera on Vancouver Island some years ago, in partnership with a land-based salmon aquaculture company, they lost millions of dollars, and it failed.
So I guess my thing it was not so much the man-made side, but is on, let's say, Indigenous lands in the north, on rivers, in lakes.
Like, absolutely.
Not made shit. Like God made, Mother Nature made the lake.
Trout, you bet.
Do that.
Absolutely.
And then I would assume that it's not seaweed in a river, but I'm sure there's greens of some kind.
There's absolutely. Yeah. I just refer to it as weed, but it could be microalgae, it could be macroalgae, right?
Yeah.
That blue-green algae stuff, it's grown in water.
But I guess is that something that, I mean, we got coastline, which is there.
Ontario's growing freshwater fish.
Yeah.
All over the place. Absolutely.
We've got to find a better way to do what we do with food.
Yeah.
And we have so much resource in this country. Like, it's ridiculous how much resource of water and land. I mean, seriously, we got more fresh water than anybody on the planet.
Yeah.
We got
agriculture is the future.
Saltwater coastline than anybody on the planet.
Yeah. And we aquaculture is the future of sustainable food production from the ocean and from seafood. And aquaculture is not the exclusive domain of British Columbia with its amazing coastline, as you say. It's being done all over Canada. Eastern Canada is very successful at it, and that's primarily because they have less regulatory challenges, less government interference. They have more provincial control over their aquaculture. Our aquaculture used to be governed by the province of British Columbia, and the sector was growing, and we were getting it right, and we were becoming something. And since DFO took over aquaculture, we haven't done that well, unfortunately.
I think they have probably the same problems in the East too, though, Dave. I don't know for sure, or Daniel. I would assume that the DFO, not to pick on government, but the DFO, didn't do a great job, let's say, with the cod fisheries of the days of old. So I think they made enough catastrophic mistakes where they probably said, you know what, maybe the people who are there for hundreds of years who didn't have a problem until we sort of all got in drive and created a problem. Like, maybe it's like you've got people who live on these lands and these waters, again, for tens of thousands of years. It doesn't hurt to ask them.
No.
What do you think? You guys
we can only learn from them.
Well, that's what you're thinking. You guys did it. I mean, you did it well.
There's lots
here. Take advantage of the base of knowledge that you have.
You're absolutely right. I do a lot of work fairs, employment fairs, and whatnot, and I present the work that I do to communities, and because it's their resources, it's their land, it's their water, and I want to be accountable. I want to be accountable to that, and I want to know that I'm upholding and respecting their values and principles around stewardship and marine resource management. And I go to these fairs, and I've got people come up to me. Well, aquaculture, we don't necessarily trust it so much. It's a quote unquote white man kind of thing. And I'm going, whoa, just a second here. I said, you guys were doing aquaculture way before anybody else.
You guys were the ones that started it, in essence.
I remember this little girl in Port Alberni, and she looked at me, and I had all these shells. I was telling her the difference between a geoduck shell and a scallop shell and a horse clam shell, little manila clam, little neck clam, and oysters, and all this. And she's fascinated. And I said, your ancestors started all this. And she goes, what? I said, yeah, have you heard of clam gardens? Well, yeah, but I don't know what they are. I said, well, we know now, and your ancestors and your family know that back before contact, they were going out to their traditional territories, modifying beaches, literally moving boulders around and moving substrate like sand around, to improve the beach's capacity to produce clams.
Farming.
And that in itself, when you start modifying the substrate, that's part of husbandry, it's part of cultivation. You're doing exactly that. And not only that, but they would go to winter villages where there was really great clamming, but they couldn't necessarily go there in the winter, or sorry, the other way around. Anyways, and they would take small juvenile clams and harvest them, and then plant them on these, modified clam garden beaches, and would reap the reward. They'd have clams year round, and the beaches would produce, maybe 5 times more than just naturally in nature if left alone. And so they understood what retaining the water between tides did, what improving the substrate, what moving the beach did. Like literally digging up a beach stimulates a natural recruitment of clams in that beach. That's aquaculture.
Yeah.
She just looked at me like, you mean we invented it? I said, yeah.
Yeah.
That girl's eyes were like, and she took that to her family, and I got an email thanking me for like showing that perspective. And man,
that's worth everything, man.
That was worth a lot.
Plus, you got someone now. She's probably going to be the lead aquaculturist in a couple of years,
right? And that's part of the work I do. I help set up farms. I get them into farms. We just installed an oyster farm up in Cayuca. We're about to start a scallop farm, and I'm working on the first First Nation owned geoduck farm in Barkley Sound for the Toquat Nation, and that's huge. And it's taken like 5 years to get us there, but the money's in place, all the licenses are in place, anyways, and a scallop farm also there. But at the end of the day, my work is about being able to transfer what I know and learn about the environment from them and what works best, and eventually, hopefully, leaving an aquaculture business or enterprise or farm that's working for them, right, and that they can continue to grow. And that's a good story. I went from buying food from distributors and paying chefs to turn it into exquisite, dishes for people to enjoy, to just getting back to the basics. And I do like water. I'm a sailor, and that's from my father's side of the family, which is from Brittany, France. I have that in my blood, I believe, and that satisfies me. But to me, that's a better story than being a restaurateur for me, anyways. And that's why I find myself doing this.
That's awesome, buddy.
But it's really great talking to guys like you, because I'll be honest, I am podcast illiterate.
You killed it.
I'm at an age where
you killed it.
You killed it. Yeah. You killed. And I'll tell you what, to be honest with you, in the next year, it sounds like you got a lot of stuff going on. If you want to come back on, whenever you want, if you got some really cool news and story, like we do 2 things. We do the podcast, which is usually an hour. We also do some short clips that we feed onto YouTube. And they're just like updates in people's worlds who've been on the podcast, etc. Because we both are foodies too. Like we both really enjoy food. I love cooking food. He loves cooking. Like we love eating. Yeah. And I do. The difference between having something fresh like truly fresh, is so much different than having something imported, 10,000, 15,000 miles away and who knows how long it's been where it's been or whatever, or processed.
Yeah. Well, maybe in the future, there's an opportunity for some kind of a gala dinner for all the cast and crew and previous podcasters of This Commerce Life. And if you pull something like that together, I'll bring some oysters and some scallops and even some seaweed. That'll blow your mind.
If you and Maurice
get ourselves organized, we want to come up and see you.
Yeah, no, we can arrange that too. We'd love to do that. And I'll have a really good story to tell in the next 12 months. We're working on a joint venture, a partnership with a sablefish company. I'm very confident that it will be successful, but it will basically be the very first First Nation and industry partnership sablefish farm enterprise to be launched. And the nation is fully supportive of farming sablefish. And that's going to be a really cool story, because there are many First Nations involved in oyster farming and clam farming, and now soon, and scallop farming. Not many in scallop farming, but some, and soon geoduck aquaculture. But boy, oh boy! But I'll tell you, one day I'm going to take you out in the field. We'll take some scallops out of our lantern nets growing in this pristine water. They're going to be 10-count scallops. The mussels are going to be 10 counts. They're going to be fresh, buttery, and sweet. We're going to pop one open.
We're all over it.
Cut it out, and then we're going to wrap it in some freshly grown sugar kelp or even Neurocystis that we've grown on a farm. I'll just wrap it around the scallop. You'll pop it in your mouth, and you'll say, "Why have I never had this before?"
See, I'm drooling now.
So me too.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's a tasty story.
We're all over it, buddy. Listen.
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure, you guys. I really enjoyed this. I'd love to be invited back again, and I can certainly keep you apprised of the progress and development of First Nation.
You can just ping us. Like if you get to a point, like in 6, 9 months, like 12 months, whenever this happens, and you want to tell the story, like just ping us. Like seriously, I mean,
you bet.
We want to try to do more for aquaculture and proper land-based farming as well, like all farming in general, and really trying to get people a little more, even if we just change 2 or 3 listeners who just now talk Skipper Otto or look more into the indigenous fisheries or ask where their beef comes from. I don't care what, as long as we're just asking more questions, we in theory should be on a better path.
Well, that's success, in my opinion.
Mine too.
That's the direction I feel that we and humanity should be like headed for.
We need to do this.
We need to do it.
Yeah, we need to save ourselves. Like nobody else is going to save us.
No, and we're doing
it because we fix our own problems, right?
Yeah, we're good at screwing things up. We really need to fix a few things now.
Yeah. And another thing about aquaculture we haven't touched on, food security, and that's maybe another show. But
that's another show, baby.
Our wild stocks are threatened. Overfishing, breed, blah blah blah. Man, oh man, food security.
We know.
Yeah, that's scary. Another plus.
Okay, my friend.
Okay.
Cheers.
Go to Marisa, and we'll catch up with you soon. And thank you very much for doing this with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's really been my pleasure. Nice meeting you, Phil.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel.
Phil, you stick around. Daniel, go do your fishing things.
Okay. Cheers.
Take care, buddy.
Bye.
Ciao.
Wow.
It's seriously, every time we talk to people who do shit on the land, in the water, like are grounded to earth, I mean, I just love it because I really do. I think we've just lost complete touch with this planet. I really sometimes really believe that.
We know fuck all about fuck
we
all.
know less than fuck all, to be honest. But you know what? Again, if there's other, even if some of our regular listeners, if there's people within the farming spaces or aquaculture, whatever you want to, like any of these things, we really need food security is a big issue. Big issue.
I think as we pull at this too, because I think with listeners like Kenny and I, you guys are pretty amazing because you come along on our paths and we take you places that you probably never intended to go. But I think as we get into this stuff and some of this is really interesting to you, shoot us a note and let us know what you want us to crack open some more, right?
If you know somebody, there might be other things, like just let us know some of
like,
the
to us, these things are important. You know, you start to hopefully we're starting to help you make some ties between, you know, some of the problems we're having in country and then things that we could actually fix along the way.
Yeah.
You know, from farming to all of this seafood stuff that clearly I know zero, like less than zero about, right? Besides how to eat it. You know, so anyway, we're so long in the tooth. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for everybody.